Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to A to Z Running. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the A to Z Running Podcast. I'm Andy.
With Zach.
And we are talking to a PT and author, Mike Swinger. He wrote the book, A Runner's Fix, DIY Guide for Running Pain-Free.
And that title should probably catch your attention because if you're anything like any other sane human being, the idea of doing anything pain-free is a good idea.
Yeah.
So
the bad kind of pain. I guess you can't promise that running will just totally be pain-free, even if you're
No, that's exactly what
runner.
That title is promising.
Okay. All right.
So if we'll give you his contact information, and if you ever run again with pain, you can call up Mike and tell him he was a fraud. I'm kidding.
Obviously.
But I should have thought of that joke when we were talking to him because it would have been even funnier to not be saying that behind his back. Sorry, Mike. But hopefully he'll hear this, and then it'll be at least somewhat not behind his back. So yeah, it's not a perfect claim, but he gets you a lot closer to the goal.
Yeah, especially during this time where we're not able to go see our PTs, it is a very helpful thing to be proactive in injury prevention and also be working on some of those areas that we need to strengthen in order to continue healthy running later on down the road.
And if I can just preface with one more comment that he makes the suggestion we really don't need to go see a PT every time we've got a tight muscle or something that's a little bit sore or abnormally painful. The point isn't that you always immediately, pull the lifeline and go see someone about that stuff. However, those are things indicative of potential problems.
Exactly.
So there are things we should do.
You should see a PT on occasion. So
it's
definitely be going to see your PT. But this is kind of in that in-between time. And I think all of us, at least I can speak for myself, during marathon training, there are things that are emphasized and we can see more clearly some of our weaknesses and areas that we need to work on.
So before we get to that, let's talk about just a couple of things in running news. Okay, I didn't say the world of running because this isn't necessarily things going on right now. We got some training tips, if you will, so we'll start there. This is just a fascinating article from Podium Runner, and specifically about tempo running and threshold running and kind of what that means. And so the headline is, what exactly is a tempo run, which should capture most of our attentions to some degree because you hear people talk about tempo runs, but those aren't always clearly defined or defined in the same way, and that's exactly what they suggest in the article, actually in the subheading. And so it's a good article, it's a good read. I would encourage anyone to read it. We'll link it in the post here. But I wanted to just mention a couple of things from the article as well, because what you'll find is that there are some good approaches, and there's a reason why those are good approaches to this concept of running. So initially it mentions that there's a study that kind of originated the idea, or at least the term tempo running to some degree. Obviously this has been around for quite a long time. Some have claimed that Lydiard is actually the one who created the concept of the tempo run originally.
You'd like to think so, because you love Lydiard.
Well, I do like Lydiard. Here's my thing on training. Go back as far as you can to the first person who is doing that kind of good training and take a look at what that person was doing. Don't look at the people who adopted it from the guy who adopted it from the guy who adopted it from. And so my point is trying to get to the origin of it and why did they do the things they did? What was going on in their minds? That's the kind of thing that I try to get at when I'm trying to figure out how to do training well, right? So Lydiard tends to be one who originated a lot of what we consider to be modern practices, not all of them by any means, but a number of them. And so I like to go back there. But this in particular references a study in the 80s where they were trying to basically just look at like a blood oxygen kind of thing, which we traditionally consider to be like VO2 max types of measurements. And so they were looking at that, and they were finding that it's very easy to improve someone's blood oxygen levels with this 20-minute tempo. They didn't call it that at the time, but these 20-minute tempo runs done a couple of times a week. And there's a lot of interesting reflection from everyone under the sun in the running world about like what is the right amount for a tempo run, what's the right approach for a tempo run. They give you some insight into a few different ways people approach tempo run workouts, like actually just a straight tempo or, repeats or all those kinds of things. But there is one fascinating thing, and I want to encourage anyone listening to consider this in your training. Many of the earlier sources on this concept of training suggest that there's not much value to doing more than about 20 minutes of tempo running. Some more can be okay, but not much more from most of them. In terms of cost benefit, so the benefit you get from the tempo run starts to wane and the costs start to rise the longer you go at that pace. Just meaning in terms of recovery time. It takes more time to recover from a 45-minute tempo run than a 30-minute tempo, obviously. But the suggestion is you get the most benefit with the least cost in terms of recovery somewhere around that 20-minute mark, which is a good insight. Definitely a tidbit we should all take away.
Cool. Well, the next little bit, you're not going to really want to take away any tips from this piece of history we're about to share with you. There's a lot of things we learned not to do from the 1904 Olympic Marathon.
So good. 1904 Olympic Marathon. So if you didn't think they were running the marathon in the Olympics that long ago, they were.
But not very well, and not many people finished.
So this was in the U.S. I didn't even know this. The 1904 Olympics were in
St. Louis.
And so that was interesting little tidbit that I've seen, the chart of where every Olympic Games was, but it didn't register. And not only that, but it was, St. Louis in the summer.
Yep.
Reflect on that
Hot.
for a moment with me.
Very
hot and
very
humid.
Warm.
Oh, man. And that only starts down this road. Okay, Andy, what did you notice? What was crazy?
So that's part of the strange fact is that they weren't giving these athletes water. There were only 2 water stations for the entire marathon, and it was like super, super hot. And they were testing a theory by James E. Sullivan, which was one of the game's chief organizers, about purposeful dehydration. And they thought it'd be helpful, and they had a laboratory.
Seriously.
They were guinea pigs. They were running little guinea pigs to help, I guess, not support this. It actually disproved the theory of having purposeful dehydration being beneficial.
Yeah, so this is the way science worked for most things in terms of running back then. Someone got an idea, and they had people do stuff, and then they looked at the results and thought, did it work? And they didn't test things. They especially didn't have a lot of access to the actual science. That's crazy. At the Olympics, in the marathon. Let's see what happens if they dehydrate all the marathoners.
So only 14 of the 32 entrants finished the race.
First, we should reflect on the fact that there are only 32 people in the race.
Wow.
And, of the 32, what 19 of them were Americans? What was the number there? Yeah. So, and not a very well-represented marathon.
No,
Olympics.
but we should talk about the guy who is poisoned by rat poison during the race.
We should mention it was on purpose from his team.
So weird.
Yeah, so here's what they thought. This guy it was like maybe 10 miles into the race, and he was struggling. He was just having a hard time. And so they wanted to give him a performance boost. So remember, like very unregulated in terms of what athletes were doing. They weren't drug testing all these guys all the time. So his people, I don't know if it's his trainers, doctors, coaches, whoever it was, his people gave him some alcohol. I can't remember exactly what the kind is. Andy's looking for the direct reference with a little bit of rat poison, not arsenic, and whatever they were using as rat poison.
Brandy.
Brandy and rat poison. And here's why. And it's not a bad thought. The ingredient in the rat poison was kind of like a nerve-related thing.
So they stimulate your nervous system.
Yeah, they thought they could just kind of, jack him up a little bit with some brandy and nerve. So they're giving him a downer and an upper at the same time, which is never a good idea.
Oh, yeah.
So good.
And champagne was often drunk during races instead of water during that time as well.
They were quite classy back then.
So classy.
So classy. Not to mention the guy who ran in this race in his,
Beret.
well, more or less work clothes. I don't know exactly how you would call these clothes today, but they were definitely work clothes, except that he chopped off the pants at the knees.
No, someone did it for him because he came with full pants on to the starting line, and someone grabbed some scissors and helped cut his pants into shorts.
Yes. The backstory there being he barely made it. I think he was like robbed, right?
No, he got into a game of dice and he gambled all his money away. So he had to hitchhike to St. Louis. And from there, he got to the starting line and they cut his pants off. Like, he made it in the nick of time.
Hey, you don't want to run in,
in
116 heat index in your, knickerbockers, whatever. No, they're regular pants.
So we'll link to this because there are even more details. We could go on and on. And we want to thank...
Yeah, there's the guy who jumped in the car and rode in a car.
That was the same guy.
For most of the race. Was that the same guy?
With the pants cut. Yeah, it was the same guy. He actually cheated. He crossed the line first. And then at the end, someone was like, "Hey, I saw you in the car waving," and he confessed and said it was a joke. But he was about to be awarded the gold medal, which was 1904
funny.
Was the first Olympics that they gave a gold medal.
Yeah, before that, the top prize was the silver medal, and there was no third place prize because third place, who really cares? Kidding.
Hey. So, yeah, anyway, there are more details, and we want to thank Dr. Kevin Doofendock, who is our brother-in-law, for sending this to our direction. He found it quite humorous, and he thought we would too, and he was right.
Well, it was actually telling that he told me on whatever day this was published, he's like, hey, this notification just hit my Google, like, things we think you would be interested in reading. At the exact moment he was texting me that, I was looking at it on my Google recommendations of things they thought would be interesting. So apparently he and I read some similar kinds of things in Google.
Yeah, you must. And this is a good one. So thanks for sharing, Dr. Kevin Doofendock.
So we're going to put the links to both the Podium Runner article on tempo running and the 1904 Olympic Marathon article. And you will definitely want to check those out. AtoZrunning.com/episode 29. Next up is Mike Swinger, author of Runner's Fix, a DIY guide to running pain-free, as mentioned. And the conversation is going to kind of just navigate some of his recommendations and suggestions, very practical for you all. And don't forget, we've got a giveaway as well of his book, and that's more details on the post, as well as we'll mention it a little bit more at the end.
We're so excited to have Mike on. He has 5 kids. He and his wife, Sarah, both run and compete in triathlons. So on top of his education, he also has some great experience in athletics. He is not only a PT, but he also, of course, is an author, and he has a blog. You can find that runphys.com, and that's runphys.com. He also has a YouTube channel, so he's just a wealth of information, and we are really excited to have him on the show.
It should be mentioned that his work, especially like the YouTube channel and his blog, are pretty much devoted to giving you ideas for if you've got pains like this, do things like this. That's the majority of all that work. So it's the kind of stuff that is well worth time and attention.
So, of course, we'll link to all of that in our blog posts, AtoZrunning.com/episode 29.
Let's talk to Mike.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for joining us on the A to Z Running Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I got to give this brief backstory while you're on air that Andy mentioned. She's like, hey, there's this book. And we knew who you were, obviously, with we've talked with you off air about, there's plenty of connections to you individually and to your family, Cornerstone and Rockford and some other things. But Andy's like, yeah, this guy, he's a PT, he's got this book. You should take a look at it. So I pull it out and I open it up, and of course I just glance at the table of contents and I'm like, oh, this looks like exactly the kind of stuff that I'm always recommending to people. Like, we need something that's attainable and reachable, so that you don't have to wade through a ton of science just to know what the good things are that someone's telling you. And your title of your book is, like the DIY guide, and immediately that stands out to me. Like, you can figure this out without being a science person or in the medical industry. And so I start reading through it, and I'm not kidding, Mike. I actually basically just read, like, not every word, obviously, because I can't do that in in an hour or two, but just sat down and just read it all right there. And Andy was just a little bit upset with me because I didn't come to bed very timely. But all of this to say, it immediately struck me that this is the kind of thing that every runner needs to have on their shelf. This is the kind of book that we all need to have at the very least to start us down a good path of understanding strength, flexibility, form, which are, that's your big three that you started off with. So my first question for you, Mike, is why was it your intent when you set out to put this together? What was on your mind then?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and that cracks me up to hear kind of the nature that you were introduced to the book. So sorry for robbing you of some sleep there, but
I don't mind at all. And Andy didn't either after she heard why.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what I find just, interacting with runners and, being a runner myself, it's, we all have little aches and pains, little things that come up. And, so many people, the first thing they do is like, okay, I'm going to go check out YouTube. I'm going to Google it, whatever. But, you never know what kind of rabbit hole that's going to take you down or whether, the information you're going to find is going to be reliable. But also people don't want to go see their doctor or physical therapist or their trusted medical professional, every time they hiccup or anytime you feel a little ache or a pain. And so I just, perceived that there was just a big gap there. Why can't there be a very accessible resource for runners, but that's also, very accessible, but also helpful, very, very practical. And, in my opinion, the medical professionals out there who really know their stuff, it's pretty heavy to try to follow them or really discern what you should do. It's not always super practical. And so that was my goal, to be both accessible and very, very practical. And I thought, you know what, if you can pick up a copy of the book and that saves you a few visits to the doctor over the next few years, or saves you from missing any time off or, having to take time off from your training plans, then, it's a screaming bargain for that. So.
Well, we totally agree.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I would say I think from the consumer perspective, having consumed your book,
consumed it, devoured it.
Hopefully, it tasted good.
It's great. I was basically just chewing on my phone because it was through the digital copy. So, as you mentioned the goal. I think your goal was accomplished. It certainly is exactly that. It's practical, and it's the kind of work that. For our listeners right now, it's the kind of thing that you want to ingest this even if you're not looking for something specific, because it establishes, I think, really well a foundation that you can lean on. As a runner, you never know exactly when something's going to go wrong, and you never know exactly what signs are pointing to what problem. It's like when something's bad, then there's an issue. But there's little things along the way that always, there's more going on there. And I think this is the kind of thing that, the more we can have a good foundation in this kind of stuff, which is exactly what the book provides. And by the way, I haven't said the title enough yet so far. So this is Runner's Fix by Mike Swinger. And I think I've said it a couple of times. I think everybody should pick up a copy. It's the kind of thing that we all need to, we need to be able to start on a good foundation. And that's exactly what it provides.
In the beginning of the book, you talk about progressive injuries, and runners are pretty stubborn. We're
I am not at all stubborn. I resent
he's not. That. Okay. No, he's not stubborn at all. So you talk about, starting to pay attention to things. So what are some things that, common things that people should start paying attention to before they become bigger issues?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And I think every runner who's been running for any length of time can I guess sense some patterns. So whether it's just like the high school junior who's just starting into their cross country season and going, oh, I hope I can make it the whole season without my shins hurting again, or or the marathon runner who's like, oh, I hope I can get through this without my left hamstring flaring up like it always does. I think everybody kind of knows where their susceptibilities are. And so I think just the having that awareness of ways to be proactive about it. So it's not just, okay, my hamstring gets tight. Okay, I know I need to stretch my hamstring. Well, it's like, okay, obviously it could be a lot deeper than that. And there could be a lot more going on there. But as far as, things to watch for, I think, when you're running, if your form is breaking down, obviously that's a big giveaway. Which that's not always easy to tell, but hopefully, you've got some community around you, you got some running buddies or something, or teammates. Obviously during this time, it's tough to, have that kind of community, but that may be as simple as saying, hey, saying to your buddy, like, hey, I give you permission to, if ever I look like I'm slacking or look like I'm dogging it, to call me out on it. And, maybe that's an indicator right there. If form is breaking down, or you're just not running upright, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's probably the first giveaway. Obviously, pain is the biggest one. And so if you're experiencing pain that doesn't just go away within 24 hours, then that's something you got to pay attention to. Even if you can keep running, it's a big indicator that something's not right.
Yeah, definitely. And just in thinking about, the nature of how these things progress, most of the time we tend to hear, like, as I sit down with a physical therapist and he's like, oh yeah, this is the pain, but here's where you have something that's weak, or here's something that, is not firing in the right order, or is not, you don't have the total amount of recruitment that you probably need to have there. Talk to us a little bit about how we can be attentive to those kinds of things earlier on.
Yeah, that's a really good question too. Obviously, if you've got a trusted person, medical provider that can help you sort that out, then that's huge. And even if it's just like a one-time visit to where they say, okay, yeah, your glutes are your issue, or you got to engage your big toe more, or whatever it may be, and that just helps arm you. And obviously, that's part of what the book is trying to do too. But how can you be attentive to that? Well, there should be some sort of an indicator that you can feel while you run. So like if you're, if you're not engaging your glutes well enough, which, that's a whole other rabbit trail we could go down if you want to. But, that's one of the big buzzwords these days. And, but how do you actually tell? Like, how can you actually feel that? That's a tricky thing. I don't know that there's necessarily one real simple way to, have like an indicator, like a little beeping going on in your head saying, yes, they're working, or no, they're not, because you're putting one foot in front of the other regardless. So I think really, again, your form is where you're going to notice it the most. And so if you can be attentive to that, then that's your biggest thing.
On that line, I do wonder, what are some of the starting points? You think about, like, everybody should be doing something. We shouldn't all just wait until something goes wrong before I do some good general strength work, before I try to have some good general mobility and flexibility. What are some good starting points for anybody?
Yeah. I think your feet, your calves, and your hips really are the good starting points. I think you got to get your calves both loose and strong. I think a lot of the gurus out there are saying these days that if your calf is tight, it's actually weakness, and your calf is just kind of trying to protect itself. And I think there's truth to that for a lot of people. And so I think getting your calves both flexible and strong, which it is possible to have them both, that's a big starting point. So I'd say number one, I'd go there first. And I think hip mobility. So that, that's stretching your hip flexors, but for a lot of people too, I think that's also stretching your glutes, or stretching the posterior hip capsule too. Because in thinking about, okay, a lot of people are told, oh, I don't engage my glutes the right way or whatever. And so, I don't know, you see a bunch of people running down the road trying to engage their glutes, and that's something out of a blooper reel, right?
Wait, you saw me? You saw me?
You should see Andy sometimes. It's just,
no, it
great.
Really was me during this
comedy.
last training cycle.
She's like running like some Disney character in one of the old Disney films.
So, but that quite often the mobility of the joint can really hinder how well the muscles fire around it. And so if you're trying to strengthen or fire up a group of muscles that doesn't have the joints moving properly, then you're just ramming your head against a wall. And so, to answer your question, I think, getting your calves, flexible and strong, but then really getting your hips to actually work. And that's a very general answer. Sure. But, the hips, that's where most of your power should come from. That's where a lot of your stability needs to come from. And if there's even a little subtle thing about them not moving properly, then all the strength work in the world, all the clamshells, all the bridges, all the whatever you want to do really isn't going to amount to much. Sure. So, yeah.
Are you talking to me again?
Andy's going to
feel
take
like you're talking to
personally
me.
everything that you say that related to weakness and tightness. So I'm curious, Mike, just on that thread, in your book, you say the quote, "All muscle tightness is not created equal," which I think, and all of us, once we've run long enough, probably get a sense of that. But can you kind of articulate that a little bit more for us? How, tightness and immobility and inflexibility, there's some different nuances involved there.
Yeah, well, it's just like I was just saying, sometimes a muscle is tight because it's tight and it's never had to work at a longer length. But sometimes it's tight because it's trying to protect itself. And so again, that's where a lot of the common wisdom is these days, especially in the calves, is just, okay, if the calf is feeling overburdened, doesn't feel like it can lengthen under load very happily or very far, then it's going to try to protect itself. So if you go to just try to stretch that muscle, what are you going to get? That muscle's probably going to fight back, and it might try to tighten up on you. It might get angry in other ways. You might aggravate your Achilles or whatever. But if you got muscles that are just flat out tight because you're sitting all day, well, then that should respond to some stretching and some more direct mobility work. Right. And so I think it's important to understand, okay, why is this tight? Why am I feeling this? And that can help you really, sort through that. And also along with that, hamstring tightness is a very common thing, but in my opinion, rarely is it the hamstring's fault. So if we just stretch our hamstrings till we're blue in the face, we might be, doing ourselves a disservice. So that's where I think it's more important really to get the hips working correctly. And a lot of times that's really stretching the quads, stretching the front of the hip. And what that does to the mechanics of your hip allows you to use your glutes more, which means your hamstrings don't have to work as hard. And so I think being aware of those patterns and trying to really understand, okay, what's the underlying cause behind this muscle tightness? So, and not only muscles, but then again, the joint capsules. Everywhere you got two bones meeting together, that's a joint, and you've got ligaments that hold it together. And that's what guides the movement. But if those joints have not moved like they should, then those ligaments are going to be tight, sort of similar to muscles, but also there's different physiology going on there. And if that's where the tightness is actually coming from, then you got to address that in a different way. So if you think about your hip, your glute area, okay, you could stretch your glutes, but if it's more of like a capsular type tightness, then just a sustained hold may not get you what you need. You may need to do more of like a mobilization, kind of like a gentle, pulsing. So, just those subtle things can make a big difference.
That's a great point. Obviously, the talk of the town in a lot of these ways is like foam rolling and, the trigger point devices that are all over the internet. And you can pay many thousands of dollars to get all the great equipment. What is the role with the conversation about mobility in like myofascial and fascia related things as well?
Yeah, it's a very worthwhile conversation, and foam rolling has definitely been one of the biggest go-to things, and I think rightfully so. I think it can be overdone. I think it can be relied on too much, and there's a lot of people out there these days saying, "Oh, you shouldn't foam roll your IT band," which which there's a lot of people out there saying that, and a lot of people buying into that, and I disagree with that. I think it can be overdone. I think it can be done improperly, but I think it's still very beneficial. The people who are saying you shouldn't foam roll your IT band, they're saying, oh, it's because your IT band physically doesn't stretch. And that's true. Your IT band is a very thick, sheath of connective tissue. And so there really isn't flexibility there, but you're accomplishing more than just gaining length in the IT band, because the IT band goes over top of your lateral quad, known as your vastus lateralis, and also over top the outside of your hip, and really influences your glutes and your tensor fasciae latae, one of your hip flexors.
I remember your joke about that it sounds like a fancy coffee.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
And I was like, yes, it does sound like a fancy coffee.
Well, I get asked that all the time in the clinic when I'm mentioning that to people. They all just look at me And it's funny because they have that same expression like, oh, I've got an original joke you've never heard before. Is that a coffee drink?
Yeah.
Oh, never heard that one before.
Oh, I haven't. That's why I thought it was so clever.
Oh, okay.
He has, but he...
Gotcha.
Yeah, well,
Of course.
Yeah. So, so, your myofascial, fascia is the connective tissue that runs all over your body. There's just thousands of little elastic fibers all over your body. And what the fascia does, the little elastic fibers, is they adapt and kind of lay down according to the movement patterns that you develop. And so there's cross patterns for runners, from one leg through the opposite side of the upper body. You think about how, your upper body and lower body are working reciprocally. And that's all over your body. So anytime you have any kind of a habit, good or bad, your fascia is going to adapt to that. And so then that fascia then either helps or hinders how well the muscles work. So myofascial, myo just refers to muscle. So the muscle fascia interaction. And so I think it's helpful to do myofascial work. Quite frankly, I think a $10 or $20 foam roller works just as well as any kind of a fancy device you want to get.
Yep.
And the same thing, tennis ball, lacrosse ball. I mean, if you want to shell out some bucks on something fancier, go for it. I really don't think you're going to get much, if any, more benefit. But I think it's all valid. I think in the right context, you don't want to be foam rolling 3 times a day for 5 minutes at a time. That's going to be too much. But yeah, it can be part of your warm up, can be part of your kind of self-maintenance. I think it's very, very, very valid.
That's great.
Oh.
So you said something about, this is kind of a transition, the upper and the lower body, how they're working together. And I had watched that YouTube that you just put out about, I'm going to look up the airplane zombie. And I'd never seen that one before. And it sounds like that's one I should be doing, because you said it forces our hips and lower core to dial in more quickly before a run. So it's a drill to do before running. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for referencing that. Yeah, I mean, the naming of it is just, I don't know. I
love it.
That's just where it comes
it's
from.
Perfect. I'll remember it. I think that's good because, like, a lot of us need something visual to help us remember a drill. So, yeah, I think that's good.
Good. Well, it's a series of I just call them the zombie drills. And that's where you're running with your hands in different positions. And because when you think about what your upper body does, your upper body really is counterbalancing what your lower body is doing. And so if your legs are working perfectly efficiently, your hips, your core, everything's dialed in, what should your upper body be doing? Mostly relaxed, but just kind of arms pumping forward and backward, But what often happens is, well, if things get inefficient, we're not dialing in as quickly with our hips or our core, or, we're spending too much time on the ground, whatever, then a lot of times our upper body will have to work differently to counteract that. That's, the physics of it. There's levers going on there as far as how our upper body is leveraging our lower body. And again, those cross patterns getting loaded, lengthened, and coming out of it. And so what I find is that a lot of people in the transverse plane of motion, so the rotational motion through their hips, don't dial in as quickly as they should. They're not as stable as they should be. And so what does that look like with the upper body? Well, sometimes those arms start kind of crossing the midline, or the hands cross the midline, or your arm swing looks more circular rather than forward and backward. And so what you're doing there is you're trying to kind of absorb and kind of figure out what to do with those extra rotational forces that should have been reconciled in your hips, but have now trickled their way up to your upper body. And so when you're running like that, that's a dead giveaway. So the airplane zombie, what you're doing with your arms, by putting them way out to the side, is you're making your arms a much longer lever arm, in which case, what that does is if it kind of takes away your ability to cheat like that, because, if you're just running normal and your arms are by your side, well, you can get away with that. It's more subtle. But when your arms are way out to the side, if you're still doing that, then your arms are going to be traveling a lot, and you're going to notice that. And so when you run with your arms way out to the side, well, your hips are naturally going to dial in more quickly because they have to. Otherwise, you're not going to go anywhere. So I think it's a great drill to just do as part of your warm-up, or, if you're in the middle of an easy long run or whatever, then just, throw those arms out there for 10 seconds just to kind of recalibrate. So quite honestly, to answer the question from a few questions ago, how do you know? How do you tell? You can't always know. So I'm a big fan of finding ways to kind of recalibrate yourself like that, and just sort of assume that your body is going to kind of, drift towards some bad habits unless we're being proactive. And so that's why, I'm a fan of finding ways to be proactive and kind of recalibrate your body as you go.
So those people that you see in like race photos that are like, yeah, they're not just doing it for the camera. Maybe they're recalibrating.
No, they're just doing it for the camera.
Maybe they're
don't even try
know,
to.
But they don't even know
no.
they're brilliant. Maybe they just do it naturally, and they're like, oh, and then their hips are recalibrated, and they have more energy to finish off strong.
So I'm appreciating, Mike.
That's a good point.
I'm just going to ignore that Andy even said that. I'm appreciating just the reflection on, so we're talking about law of entropy here, where we're constantly moving toward less effective running and less efficient running, as I get more tired and as I am running faster, or, those kinds of things. So like in a race, in a workout, long run, and even like one of the things that always strikes me is just as I get less focused. So, in general, most of us don't run an hour-long run dialed in, laser focused the entire time on our form and on our mechanics. We usually don't think about it 100% of the run, right? Let's assume. Do you?
Yeah. Oh, goodness, no, and you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't
Right.
have to. Oh my, that sounds terrible, right?
It does.
I mean,
it does.
I mean, who would want to be done with your run and be so mentally fatigued? It's running should be therapeutic most of the time.
That's it.
So
That's it.
no,
So
so you
that
shouldn't have to.
recalibration, right? What are some of the other? Because that's a good example of one that is pretty specific to why you would do that. What are some of the other ones that you think through, like how most of us probably need to check back in or recalibrate in a given period?
Yeah, well, that's why the airplane zombie is one of them. But then there's the other zombie drills, and so just literally running along and just putting your hands straight up in the air and just running tall. That again, same kind of thing. We talk about the airplane zombie being the transverse plane kind of a fix or recalibrator. I don't know. Is that a word?
Sounds good.
So same thing, as you start to get fatigued, you maybe start to hunch a little bit more. So what happens if you make your upper body a longer lever arm by going up top? Well, you have to naturally kind of straighten up a little bit more, like in a good way. So overhead zombie, I like that one. Even straight out in front of you, just reaching your hand straight out front. And that's really where that's where I first started calling it the zombie, was the ones for straight out in front of you.
Right.
Because that's right. You can picture that, right?
Yeah.
And so quite honestly, just doing those three are some of my favorites. I do those during my runs. So those, and people, do few little pickups or little strides in the middle of a run. I think that's fairly common. But also, for me, like, I think hip extension's a big limiter for me. So sometimes I may just, do a few little bounds or something just to kind of really open up the stride and not worry about my cadence at that point or stride length, but just do some little things like that to kind of open up your hips or keep things moving, or even, do a few little side shuffles, a few little karaokes in the middle of a run, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of a long-winded answer, but
no, but
I
that's exactly, I think that's exactly what we need is, any one of us runners listening are reflecting on this, because it's very reminiscent, and this is probably for a reason. It's very reminiscent of the kinds of drills most recommend doing before the run. Any of the activation type dynamic drills. And it's the same kind of thing in that sense. You just, why not sprinkle those kinds of things into the run as well, especially something that's longer or during a rest period on, some kind of like interval type workout, that kind of thing for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. You don't need to do them while you're in the middle of doing like a track workout, doing your 400 repeats, but yeah, during the rest laps or just a recovery run, that's the time to, sprinkle that kind of stuff in. Totally.
It's great.
So there's a lot of people at home right now, depending on what time
I
people
hope there
are
are a
listening
lot
to
of
this
people
episode.
at home.
So what are some common issues that you've addressed in your book that people at home should be paying attention to right now?
Yeah, well, I think, like we were talking about earlier, everyone's kind of got their areas of susceptibility, and hopefully you're being honest with yourself, and as far as saying, okay, I know, my plantar fasciitis always kind of cranks up on me when I'm hitting peak mileage, but hey, here I am at home. The coronavirus thing is cancel all the races. I don't have anything pending. So, this is the time to really be proactive about some stuff. So, so if it's your feet, then you maybe look at it and say, okay, what's my issue? Is my big toe not flexible enough? So, you know what? I'm going to just really make it a point to spend 10 minutes on this every day. And I'm going to, do these little silly stretches and these little foot dexterity moves. And, while I'm washing dishes, I'm going to bounce on one leg, that kind of stuff. And so that's really, again, the point of the book is not only to help you kind of figure out what could be the underlying causes, but also give you some very practical things that you can do anywhere. So there's, minimal equipment, things you can just really sprinkle into your day. And so I think that's really the key thing is, what body part do you think needs to work? Do you need to get your hips stronger? Okay, well, again, maybe you're find one or two key stretches just to open things up, just because hips are so susceptible to just kind of being tight. But, maybe that means throughout the day, you just once every hour, you balance on one leg and do a few of those, what I call the twisty Superman squats, which I don't know if you guys have tried those. Those are challenging but fun. But if you get the hang of it, like, you feel muscles working in some fresh ways. So, so I think that's the thing is, figure out what 2-3 exercises are really the best for you that your body responds to, and just, really make those a priority here over these days and over these weeks when you're stuck at home. If you're not going to the gym, whatever. So
that's key advice. And I think, more than anything, because, I can't say I've read every book out there that does this kind of thing, but I've read enough of them to know that the way you set that up, Mike, is just so clutch, because you just start, I think it's low back, right? You start in the back and you just work your way down from the back down to your toes, essentially. And all the different areas where, you might be able to identify some potential concerns, and then you walk through some ways to address those. And it's, like you say, it's so practical and so accessible to anybody. So I can appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, we definitely appreciate it. I don't want to stop saying it for our audience, so the message is so clear that just practical and accessible, whatever someone's level of understanding and knowledge, whatever status in the sport, if we want to understand ourselves more fully, and if we want to succeed at our goals in the sport, whatever they may be, to a greater degree, then we need a good foundation in mobility and in strength and form. And your book does that so well. And I know more, beyond that, your work with the blog and your YouTube resources, you've got a lot there that I think everybody should be, paying attention to. We definitely appreciate that. That's Runner's Fix by Mike Swinger. That's a DIY guide for running pain-free.
And, of course, we'll link to it here in our blog post associated with this episode, which is episode 29.
So that's atozrunning.com/episode 29.
And we'll also put the YouTube channel there, too, and the blog, and a way to contact Mike.
So the last thought then, what's kind of like the message that you want to convey to people, when you work with people and you're trying to help them out and support them, what, in a clear and succinct, and maybe this is just a summary of what you've already been sharing, what's the message?
Yeah, well, I think the message is you can be in control of how your body is working. Yes, it takes some work. It takes a little bit of figuring out, but you can be in control of it, and you can influence it. I think so many runners, they start to feel some pain and they go, oh, here we go again. They feel like, they're powerless to really do anything about it. And I just don't think that's true. I mean, sure, if you get a stress fracture, okay, you got to shut it down for a while. You can't argue with that. But, most running injuries are on a big spectrum with many shades of gray rather than black and white injuries. Yeah. And so just knowing that you can, once you start to feel something happening, you can influence it to go back the other way. And that's really what I'm trying to do with the book, is try to equip you to, figure out how to make things go in the right direction. And so kind of along with that, and I think this helps, again, the question from right out of the gates that I sort of didn't answer real directly or real well, but, how do you tell? How do you know, what's working and what's not? And this is the challenge to all runners, but I put it out there to you guys and to listeners or whoever, is, give one or two of the exercises a try. Look at the book. There's dozens of different things in there, And, you could probably just flip through it, and you could probably hone in on, like, you know what, I bet these sections are the ones that speak to me the most. So I'm going to start there. So I'm going to do those exercises as part of my warm up, and I'm just going to see how that run goes. And if it feels like, hey, I feel lighter, I feel more open, I feel better, whatever it is, then that right there is a big clue that, those might be my exercises. If you do those exercises and don't feel any different, well then, okay, try something else. But really make yourself a case study of one as far as, figure out what exercises you respond to. And there's just no way around just putting in the work of doing it. Trying some things, see how you feel, see how that run goes. If it goes well, try it again. And, with a little bit of work, a little bit of intentionality, you should be able to really hone in on some of those key things for you. And that's worth it. And what better time to do that than now, when you're not staring down your big goal race here. So that's succinct enough.
Well, that is fantastic advice.
Absolutely.
That you do have control. That's not like, oh, poor me, I have this pain. There are things that we can be doing. And so we can start by doing some of these things in the Runner's Fix. And for people that go to your PT, do the exercises they prescribe. I mean, I'm sure that you see all the time, Mike, where, people keep showing up with the same problems and they're not doing the exercises. So really we have a lot of control over our situation, and we need to be intentional. Like you said, we need to be intentional and show up and do these things. I love that. That's a great message.
Cool. Yeah, it drives me nuts. I get someone who, come to see me for therapy and, they say, okay, here, do these exercises. And they come back and they say, well, I didn't feel much different, so I stopped doing them after a day. It's like,
yeah, one day.
It's like, okay, at least give them a week. And if they're not working, then at least we know they didn't work. Yeah. But you got to give them time to actually, make their effect. And so, it's worth it. It's worth it to yourself to really put in the effort, even if it isn't the right thing. At least you know that. At least you've proved it to yourself.
Right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time now, and certainly, thank your family for sharing you with us for a little bit here.
Yeah. And we will have a giveaway of Mike's book, and we will put details to that in this blog post associated with this episode, which again is episode 29. Thanks so much for joining us, Mike.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
So not much needs to be said at this point, but we did want to mention, after having listened to Mike and talking with him and seen some things on his blogs and such, Andy adopted one of his recommendations, gave it a shot over the weekend that followed our interview, and has some reflections.
Yeah, I will be continuing being a zombie runner for the rest of my life, as long as I foresee it.
Let's be honest. To be a zombie runner, you got to be dead first. So you're not going to be for the rest of your life.
Okay. Yep.
Gotcha.
I hear that. You got me. I found a lot of benefit to doing these zombie drills, exercises during my runs, because you're actually running still. So you just put your arms up to the front, to the side, straight up in the air. We are linking to those YouTube videos of Mike's in our blog post, but I wanted to mention it because it really did help me. I felt engagement in my core, and my hips did feel more activated and stabilized. So just from the onset of trying this, I would say to make sure you're doing that during your runs. If you're feeling like you're not using your core and your hips, I think it's invaluable.
Yeah, so this is an element that we just haven't really addressed at all in our own practice, and certainly not in our working with athletes presently, which is how to do kind of like status checks during your run. And so certainly in our minds, it's usually just been, I kind of just think about it for a little bit and try to straighten up some, try to, pick up my cadence if it's starting to slag, all that kind of stuff. But in reality, I don't have necessarily specific ideas of things that people can do to re-neutralize or centralize yourself in some way. And these are great tips for that kind of thing. So we're adding it to our A list of the kinds of things that everyone should have on their, in their toolkit as runners. Certainly that, and we're going to link those for you as well.
Mm-hmm. So thanks again for joining us. Make sure you follow Mike at RunFizz and at AtoZrunning if you want to keep on continuing with us on this journey of running together.